Well, hello there. Lovely time of day to do a recording. Thompson et al. 2019, Chapter 4. It's a rather comprehensive chapter, and what we're looking at is evaluating a company's resources, capabilities, and competitiveness. So in the previous chapter, we learnt some tools of industry and how to analyze competitive situations so that we assess a company's external environment and lay the groundwork to match a company's strategy to that external environment. Whereas this chapter, Chapter 4, we're discussing techniques for evaluating a company's internal search, including resources and capabilities and activities that it performs along the value chain. So the internal analysis is what enables the managers to determine whether their strategy is likely to give the company a significant competitive edge over competitors or not. And then when we combine the internal and the external, we facilitate a way to recognize how to position or maybe reposition a firm to take advantage of the market opportunities and to cope with emerging competitive threats. All right, so in this chapter, we're learning about the hows, how to evaluate whether or not a firm's strategy is working, how to assess the company's strengths and weakness in light of the market opportunities and external threats. We learn to assess company resources and capabilities that can enable us to achieve a competitive edge. We learn how the value chain activities affect the cost structure and the customer value proposition. And we learn how to comprehensively evaluate the competitive situation that will assist managers in making critical decisions about their strategic moves. So let's start with question 1. How well is the company present strategy working? Well, we're looking at 3 indicators here, and these indicators begin with whether or not the organisation is achieving the stated financial and strategic goals. Then we're going to consider financial performance over the industry average, and we also need to consider whether or not the organisation is gaining customers and gaining market share. So in this graphic, we are looking at identifying the components of a strategy. So a single business strategic action plan includes moving or flexing and curbing according to what the macro environment requires, as well as industry competitive conditions. We also need to look at basing our competitive advantage on lower costs or maybe higher product quality, maybe better quality service. And we need to look at, are we going for a market niche or specific buyers? So market expansion strategy would mean expanding the geographic coverage, whereas we might choose to narrow the geographic coverage. Then we're also looking at partnering to build valuable partnerships and strategic alliances with other organisations, other collaborators. So on top of these strategic components, the key functional strategies, the research and development function, supply chain management function, the production function, and the sales and marketing distribution function, IT function, and human resources, as well as finance These are key functional areas where we have to establish what is, or we need to identify what is our strategy for each of these functional areas. So here's some specific indicators of strategic success. When you've got sales going up and earnings going up, you're in good shape. The stock market trends are going to give you an idea of how successful you are or not. The company's overall financial strength. Whether or not you're retaining customers, or do you have to continuously invest and reinvest in customer acquisition, which is expensive. The rate at which you're converting potential customers into actual sales. And evidence of improved internal processes, such as delivery times and employee productivity. Here, we're looking at some profitability ratios that are key financial ratios, and the middle column there gives you the formula on how to calculate each of these identified profitability ratios, such as the gross profit margin, the operating profit margin, and the net profit margin, as well as the total return on assets. So there's the formula, and in the third column we've got why we need to look at these, like what do these figures tell us. This slide continues with profitability ratios and includes return on assets, return on equity, return on capital, and return on capital employed. Okay, which above and beyond the return on equity includes consideration of long-term debt. Now this slide gives us liquidity ratios, which include current ratio, current assets divided by current liabilities, and of course we want that to be positive, and working capital. Here we're looking at leverage ratios, our total debt to assets ratio, and our long-term debt to capital ratio. These leverage ratios continue with debt to equity ratio, long-term debt to equity ratio, and coverage, otherwise known as times interest earned ratio. And then we've got activity ratios. So we're looking at days of inventory. So this is a measure of inventory management efficiency. Inventory turnover, so the higher the better. Average collection period, the shorter the better on that one. And then other ratios that we look at include the dividend yield on common stock, the price to earnings ratio, which is one of your Globus ratios that you are required to meet the objective, and dividend payout ratio. In continuing, we've got the internal cash ratio and the free cash flow ratio. All right, once we get past looking at those key financial performance indicators, we move on to the question of what are the company's strengths and weaknesses in relation to the market opportunities and external threats. And here we put to work the SWOT analysis. And the SWOT analysis is a tool for identifying situational reasons for a firm's performance. So we begin with identifying core competence. What is this company good at? What's their internal strengths? What's their deficiencies? What market opportunities are they faced with? As well as what do they need to strategically defend themselves against? And when we look at strengths, we need to look at corresponding weaknesses. And similarly, when we look at opportunities, we need to look at corresponding threats. So I mentioned the term core competence there, and what is that? Well, it's an activity that the organisation performs proficiently, and it's central to their strategy and their competitive success. Whereas competence is something that the organisation has learned to perform with proficiency and an acceptable cost. So it's a true capability, but it may not be a core competence. And then we move towards considering distinctive competence. And what we're talking about here is a competitively important activity that a firm performs better than the competition. So it basically represents a competitively superior internal strength. So we need to recognize those. So what's a weakness? It's what the company is not good at, or maybe what they're lacking, or maybe it's a condition that puts them at a disadvantage. So typical weaknesses include skills, expertise, intellectual capital in competitively important areas of the particular business that we're talking about. Weaknesses might also include deficiencies in physical, organizational, or intangible assets. What do we look at in terms of market opportunities? Well, we look at emerging and fast-changing markets that represent golden opportunities that might be hidden gems. We look for evolving opportunities in mature markets, and we might also look for opportunities with market factors that align with the organisational strengths and therefore offer the most potential for the firm to gain the competitive advantage. What about threats? Well, threats are a normal course of business. However, you need to keep your eyes open because sometimes they can be fatal and sudden. So when we're considering threats, we look to identify threats that are on the near horizon, on the far horizon, and we evaluate strategic actions that can be taken to overcome or at least lessen the impact. Here's some clues on what to look for when you're putting that SWOT analysis to work. In terms of strengths and competitive assets, look at financial resources to grow the business. Look at the brand reputation. Look at cost advantages over the competition, and look at your customer base. What technology have you got to work with? Have you got an advantage there? Do you hold important patents, for example? What about bargaining power over suppliers or your buyers? These are strengths or potential strengths of an organisation that you may well be able to identify. Now, weaknesses might be that you are unable to identify any core competencies or distinctive competencies. There may be a lack of market orientation and you need to put a higher attention towards understanding customer needs. Maybe you're carrying too much debt. Maybe your costs are not competitively based. Maybe you have too narrow a product line relative to the rivals, or maybe it's the brand image that needs work. So this is a second slide that gives you some more clues about strengths and weaknesses. Moving on to opportunities and threats. This slide gives us some nice clues on what to look for. Opportunities, rising buyer demand, serving additional consumer or market segments, market expansion strategy into new geography, a product development strategy where you're expanding the product line, entering new product lines or new businesses, so diversification, and maybe taking advantage of failing trade barriers in attractive foreign markets. Sounds enticing. External threats, we need to look out for increasing intensity in the competitive domain, looking at decreases in market growth, looking for potential new entrants that might be looking to conquer the world, and us included, growing bargaining power of our customers or suppliers, or maybe shifts in consumer needs, buyer needs, away from where we are at. And adverse demographic changes may be behind this reduced demand for a particular product. This slide continues with some clues, and I'll leave you guys to read that. Okay, so what does a SWOT analysis reveal? Well, it enables us to potentially identify insights into the firm's overall business situation that can translate into recommended strategic actions. But it also might identify a potential new strategy as a potential positioning for the firm to use its strengths and seize opportunities so that we mitigate external threats. So in other words, the SWOT analysis is either going to confirm what we're doing is the right track, or we need to change and shift it up. Okay. So here, this graphic is telling us to begin with identifying the strengths, then move on to identifying the weaknesses and deficiencies. And when we have those two together, we can look at the conclusions concerning our overall business situation. What are the underlying reasons for success or lack of for the current strategy? And what are the attractive or not aspects of the company's situation? When we move on to looking at identifying market opportunities and external threats, we're essentially identifying potential ways to improve the organizational strategy. So we can use the strengths as the foundation, we can shore up the weaknesses, we can use the company's strengths to lessen identifiable threats, and we can pursue market opportunities at the recommended time, at the identified time. We can correct weaknesses and enable us to take on important market opportunities. And we can deliberately develop any potential weaknesses that we identify that may heighten our vulnerability to external threats. So question 3, what are the organisation's most important resources and capabilities, and will they enable a sustainable competitive advantage? Now, what are we talking about here? Well, resources and capabilities are competitive assets for an organisation because they determine competitiveness and the ability to succeed in the marketplace. A firm's strategy depends on these competitive assets to develop a sustainable competitive advantage. But what's the difference between a resource and a capability? So a resource is a productive input or a competitive asset that the firm owns or controls, such as a fleet of whatever vehicles. And a capability is how you put that resource or capacity to work. So, for example, you might have human resources that can enact your marketing strategy, but a high-level capacity is going to enable superior marketing. Okay, so here's some examples of tangible resources. We're talking about physical resources such as land or manufacturing plants, our equipment, our distribution centres, and maybe our natural resources. Then we've got financial resources such as cash on hand or the equivalent of, marketable securities, credit ratings and borrowing capacities. These are financial resources. Technological resources include patents, copyrights, production technology, innovation technology, and other technological processes. Organizational resources include IT and communication systems, coordination and control systems, and organizational design and reporting structures. These are organizational resources. The intangible resources within a company include human resources and intellectual capital, the brand and the reputation of an organization, the strategic alliances, the joint ventures, and the relationships and partners that provide an organization access to technology or specialized knowledge or geographic markets, and company, the organizational culture and the incentive system is also an intangible resource. So how do we identify capabilities? So the organizational capability is intangible, so we can't touch it, we can't feel it, but we can observe it. And what we're observing is a capacity of the organization to perform a critical activity that uses a combination of its resources. It may well be knowledge-based, and it may well reside in the people in our team. So it may well be intellectual capital, or it's an organizational process or a system that may well embody tacit knowledge. A resource bundle is linked and closely integrated set of competitive assets centered around one or more cross-functional capabilities. So we can look at individual organizational capabilities, or we can look at bundles of cross-functional capabilities. Okay, so how do we assess the competitive power of an organization's resources and capabilities? The total economic value produced by the firm is equal to the buyer's perceived value less what that product or service costs for the firm to produce. So competitively superior resources and capabilities are strategic assets capable of producing a sustainable competitive advantage with far greater profit potential. Okay, so it's all about looking at that total economic value and assessing whether or not we have superior resources and capabilities. Now, the VRIN test is about testing for sustainable competitive advantage. And what we're doing with the VRIN test is asking if a resource or capability is V for valuable, R for rare, I for I can't say that word, no, I can't say it. Anyway, what it means is copy. Maybe they should make it a C. And N for non-substitutable. So in terms of value, we need to ask the question, is the resource competitively valuable? Is the resource or the capability competitively valuable? Is it rare? Is it something that rivals lack and we have? Is it hard to copy? And is it vulnerable or not to the threat of substitution of different types of resources and capabilities? Right, so now we're looking at two factors that inhibit the ability of rivals to imitate an organization's most valuable resources and capabilities. So these two factors that we want to consider a social complexity and causal ambiguity. Causal ambiguity. Right? So social complexity refers to the factors in an organization's culture, the interpersonal relationships amongst managers or teams, such as the R&D team, its trust-based relationships with customers or suppliers that contribute to the competitive advantage. Right? So how socially complex are the organization's most valuable resources and capabilities? All right, that's the first factor. The second factor is causal ambiguity. And what we're talking about here is how the firm uses its resources and relationships So what we're talking about here is how the firm uses its resources and relationships that competitors are not able to understand because of the complexity. So basically, if it's ambiguous on how we do what we do, then that's our competitive advantage. Right, so when we're looking at managing resources capabilities, we need to understand that it's a dynamic process, and threats to our resources and capabilities include competitors being able to develop better substitutes over time. Threats to our resources and capabilities might also include the decay of our current capabilities, and maybe it's because we become somewhat complacent. And then another threat to our resources and capabilities is potential disruption in the competitive environment. So recognizing that our resources, the threats to our resources and capabilities is something that we need to manage in a dynamic way. We need to attend to the ongoing modification of existing competitive assets. And that means we need to take advantage of opportunities to develop new kinds of capabilities. To sustain competitiveness and help drive improvements in performance, the organisation requires recognition that our portfolio of resources and capabilities is something that we are going to have to dynamically manage and evolve. So a dynamic capability is the ongoing capacity of the organisation to modify its existing resources and capabilities to create new resources and capabilities. So we want to improve on what we've got currently, and we want to add to that so that we're effectively adding to the organisation's competitive asset portfolio. Right, question 4. How do value chain activities impact an organisation's cost structure and its customer value proposition? Well, we look to the signs of an organisation's competitive strength. Are its prices and costs competitively based in line with the rivals? Is the customer value proposition competitive, and is it cost effective? Are our bundled capabilities yielding a sustainable competitive advantage or not? So let's look at the value chain first. All right, so the value chain identifies the primary activities and related support activities that create customer value. The value chain identifies the inner workings of the firm's customer value proposition and the business model. This value chain is what allows the organisation to effectively analyse their cost structure and ability to lower prices while still maintaining their profitability. So effectively, the value chain reveals the emphasis that a firm places on particular activities that enhance differentiation and support higher prices. Here we've got a graphic of an organisational value chain. So the primary activities and costs in the value chain include supply chain management, operations, distribution, sales and marketing, servicing, and this when we consider the support activities and costs that go into each of those primary activities, support activities include research and development and systems development, for example, human resource management, as well as general administration. So each of these support activities go into making sure that these primary activities happen, and then we end up with our profit margin. So we need to compare our value chain with competitors, and by undertaking a value chain analysis, we're facilitating a comparison activity by activity and relative to competitors. So we can see where our effectiveness or maybe our efficiency should well be improved, or where we're not competitive in that regard. The value chain analysis is a process that delineates the particular primary functions of an organization's operation, and we're looking at different types of primary and secondary activities so that we are identifying major components in the internal cost structure. So we're using activity-based costing to evaluate our activities, and we're doing the same for our significant competitors to see how we compare. So an industry value chain, excuse me, I've got the hiccups, includes the internal value chain, the value chain of upstream industry suppliers, and the value chains of forward channel intermediaries. We can consider the effects on industry value chain, and what we're talking about there is the costs and the profit margins of suppliers and channel partners that can affect the prices to the end consumer. So this is an effect of the industry value chain. Another effect of the industry value chain is the activities of the channel partners that impact the industry sales volumes and the customer satisfaction. So here we've got a graphic of this value chain system. We look at supplier-related value chains. So this is the activities, costs and margins of suppliers. And then we look at the organization's value chain. And this is about internally performed activities, costs and margins. And when we're looking at our forward channel value chains, we're looking at the activities, costs and margins of our allies and strategic partners, as well as the value chain of the buyer, the industrial buyer, or maybe the end consumer. Here we've got an example of the value chain for bowl and branch. So bowl and branch manufacture luxury linens and bedding, and they have a direct-to-consumer distribution channel online website. So their cost of goods, $68.46, and their total cost, $154.38. They retail at $250, and therefore their gross margin is $95.62. So we'll do this exercise in class, but we'll ask the questions of what are the primary activities in the value chain? What are the secondary activities? What activities are linked to the value chain for the entire industry? And where is the activity industry activity chain, where is it in the industry activity chain that Boll and Branch may potentially reduce their costs without reducing their competitive strengths? All right, benchmarking. What we're doing here is assessing the cost and effectiveness of the value chain relative to best practice, for example. So we're assessing whether the cost, competitiveness, and effectiveness of an organisation's value chain are in line with the competition. Are they further ahead? Do we need to do a better job? And we get this information from market data reports that might be produced as a white paper from a consulting company or a market research organisation. There may well be publications from industry trade groups or government agencies, and we might even talk to the customers. There's a novel idea. All right. We might also visit with firms that are meeting the benchmark to, if they so allow, to see where we could be improving. This is another exercise that we'll do in class about benchmarking in the solar industry. Okay, so what are our strategic options for remedying a situation where we recognise we have a cost or value disadvantage? Well, to improve efficiency and effectiveness, we need to look at internal activity segments. We need to look at the suppliers part of the value chain, as well as the forward channel portion of the value chain system. When we're looking to improve internally performed value chain activities, we need to make sure that we're operating under best practices throughout the firm, so a continuous improvement process, specifically or maybe especially with regards high value activities. And we could look to redesign products or components of the products. We may seek to facilitate speedier or more economical manufacturing or assembly processes. Maybe we'll relocate high cost activities and outsource them to value chains that can be achieved or performed more less expensively. We might reallocate resources to address what's important to the buyers, or maybe we'll adopt productivity enhancing or maybe cost-saving technology improvements that help us be more creative, innovative, improve our design. When we're looking at improving supplier-related value chain activities, maybe what we need to do is pressure the suppliers for lower prices or get them to switch to lower price substitute inputs. Maybe we collaborate more closely. Maybe we work with suppliers to enhance the organisation's differentiation in the marketplace. Maybe we better do a better job of selecting and retaining our suppliers that are going to deliver quality standards. Maybe we should consider coordinating with suppliers and enhance design or better features that are more in line with the market demand. Maybe we can wave some money under their nose or provide some incentives so that they give us a better quality product or give them an incentive to improve. When we're looking at improving value chain activities of our distribution partners, we're looking at achieving cost-based competitiveness. So we might pressure forward channel allies to reduce their costs or maybe their markups, their margins. Maybe we'll collaborate with these forward channel allies so that we can identify any win-win opportunities that can reduce costs. Maybe we'll change to a more economical distribution strategy, including switching to a cheaper distribution channel, a less complex distribution channel, a less number of intermediaries. When we're looking at enhancing differentiation through activities at the forward end of the value chain, We may well engage in cooperative advertising and promotional efforts with our forward channel partners. We might offer exclusive arrangements with downstream operators that might include, for example, increasing incentives or offering an enhanced enhanced service orientation for them. We might also consider creating and enforcing standards for downstream activities that provide better training for our channel partners in their business practices. Okay, so we need to translate our proficient performance of the value chain activities into a competitive advantage. One option we have is to beat the competition by creating more customer value from the value chain activities for a differentiation-based competitive advantage. And if we're going to take this option, then managers decide to perform the value chain activities in ways that drive quality or maybe improved features, improved performance, or something other that differentiates. We may look at competencies that are emerging from the value chain activities that are going to drive quality improvements or performance improvements. We can look at company proficiency in performing these differentiation enhancing activities that may rise to the level of a core competence. And we can also look at performing the core competence in a way that allows it to evolve to a distinctive competence. And these are ways that an organisation can gain a competitive advantage based on differentiation. Another option that we have in when we're striving to translate our proficient value chain performance into a competitive advantage is to beat rivals based on a cost-based competitive advantage. So here, the managers decide to perform the value chain activities at a cost-efficient, using a cost-efficient emphasis. Competencies may well emerge, maybe gradually, when we're driving down the cost of the production, the inventory management, for example. And company capabilities, when we focus on efficiency, we perform certain value chain activities more efficiently, and so this may actually rise to the level of a core competence. Achieving organisational proficiency in performing the core competence also may build into a distinctive competence. So in this way, the organisation gains competitive advantage based on cost leadership. Now, moving on to question 5. Is the company competitively stronger or weaker than their competition? So we need to assess our overall competitive strength. And here we'll ask 2 questions. How does the firm rank relative to competitors on important factors that determine market success? And does the firm have net competitive advantage or disadvantage relative to the competition? So we have 5 steps here in assessing the competitive strength process. We make a list of the industry key success factors, and we measure the competitive strength or weakness for the organisation based on those industry key success factors. We assign weights to each of the measures based on perceived importance. We score the competitors on each of the measures and we multiply by the corresponding weight. We sum the weighted strengths of each factor to get an overall measure of competitive strength for each firm, and then we use the overall strength ratings to draw conclusions about the organisation's net competitive advantage or disadvantage. So here we've got an example of a weighted competitive strength assessment. And the strategic implications of a competitive strength assessment include recognising the higher a firm's overall weighted strength rating, the stronger they are competitively relative to the competition. So the rating score indicates the total net competitive advantage for an organisation relative to the competition. And firms with a high competitive strength scores, they are targets for benchmarking and may well serve as a frame of reference for the industry. The ratings show how a firm compares against the rivals factor by factor, and the strength scores are useful in deciding what potentially might our strategy be. All right, last few slides. Question 6. What strategic issues and problems merit front burner managerial attention? So here we're looking at what and how serious are the strategic issues that managers must address and resolve immediately to be more financially and competitively successful in the years ahead. So a good strategy must can include ways to deal with all of the strategic issues and hurdles that stand in the way of an organisation's financial and competitive success. So we look at the strategic priority of the how-to issues, how to meet challenges of new foreign competitors, how to combat the price discounting of rivals, how to both reduce costs and prepare for price wars, price reductions, how to sustain growth as buyer demand slows, maybe in a mature market, for example, how to adapt to the changing demographics, such as an aging population of the firm's customer base. Now, when we look at how-to issues, the next thing we look at is should we, right? Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. So should we expand rapidly, or should we be more cautious in foreign markets? Should we reposition the firm to move it into a different strategic group or not? Should we counter increasing buyer interest in substitute products, or is that just an expensive affair? We need to take a different approach to increase buyer interest in our product. Should we expand the product line? Should we correct competitive deficiencies through acquisitions, mergers, strategic alliances and partnerships, for example, that may improve our identifiable competitive weaknesses? So there you go. That's an overview of Chapter 4. We'll talk about Chapter 4 again in class, and I look forward to seeing you then. Bye.